Hi, today we're going to talk about patio speakers. So what you're looking at here is the most common type of patio station that most people have with their NuTone Intercom system. This is a 5-inch, one-piece, surface-mounted patio station. And the one-piece part means that it's a self-contained unit. It's sort of like a weatherized version of an inside station meant for patio use. And the one piece is that you have the controls here at the bottom, and you have the speaker up here at the top behind the grill, and it works just like an inside station. You control the intercom with the buttons and the volume with the volume knob, and the sound for the music comes out of the speaker here, and when you use the intercom, you push the button and speak into it, and it's just a one-piece station. It's a surface mount station because it's sitting on a mounting base. Like all outdoor equipment, and this is probably all of the components have a hard life because they're outside in their house, and there are times that they need to be repaired. And that's what we're going to talk about today is patio stations. We're going to talk about repairing a surface mount, but there are other choices also. And some of those choices have different types of components. Two-piece patio station setups were often referred to as deluxe patio stations because it was somewhat more expensive to install it because you had to buy more equipment. It was a little more labor to install it because there was a little more wiring to run, but there were some advantages to it, especially if you had a larger yard or a greater need for more sound outside. If you have a two-piece patio station setup, essentially what was done is it took this station and it divided it into half and made it two separate pieces. So you would have the controls as one piece and the speaker as the second and separate piece. And here's an example of what that would be. Here we have an outdoor patio remote station for a NuTone IM406. This is an early station. This one is from 1976. And what you have here is you have the control insert. This happens to be on a surface-mounted inside bezel, and if you were going to install this outdoors, you would remove the control assembly from the inside bezel and you would mount it in a patio remote control weather box, and that was a surface-mounted box that would have a weather shield over the front of the controls to keep the rain off the buttons. So this would be mounted. This piece is the lower half of this type of station. This is for an IM3003. So the buttons are different, but the concept is the same. So this is the lower half, and this would be mounted on the wall on your patio in some convenient location. And since there's no speaker built into this, you have to wire for a separate remotely mounted speaker. Now, the remotely mounted speaker, it could be mounted on the wall just above where the control is. Maybe you mount it up at 7 or 8 feet, and raising the speaker up projects more volume out into your yard. Or maybe you want to put the control by the patio door where it's easy to get to, but you want to put the speaker down towards the end of the house where the barbecue is or where the spa is or something like that. So it gives you more flexibility. So what kind of speaker would you typically install with something like this? Well, you would install something like this. This is an ISA77, and it's such a big beast that I'm going to have to zoom out so you can actually see it. So here's our ISA77. This is a surface mount, fully enclosed patio speaker assembly. And this is a big thing. This measures, it's about 10 inches square, and it's about 4 inches thick, and it has this really heavy-duty, swivelly mounting bracket on it. And inside here, inside the front, which I think is this side maybe, I'm not sure which side it is, we won't know till we take it apart, but inside of here is an 8-inch outdoor patio speaker cone. So instead of having a 5-inch speaker cone like you have in a station like this, you now have a big 8-inch speaker cone, and the basic rule of audio is little speaker, little sound, big speaker, big sound. And with a speaker like this, especially if you mount it way up high up here where you can't see, you're going to get a lot of sound out in your yard. And if you're really crazy about the whole thing, you might have had your installer put in 2 of these and 2 remotes, or if your installer was clever and liked to bend the rules some, you might install 2 of these on one patio remote, which is a no-no, but if you know how, you can make it work, and you would get a lot of sound out in your yard. So what happens to these? Well, it's the same thing that happens to all outdoor equipment. It's outside in the weather for maybe 40 years, and eventually the speaker cone inside the box will fail. So this came from a customer's house, and I'm going to repair it and clean it all up, and then we're going to go back out and put it back in her yard. So let's take a look at how this is made. So here's our ISA77. This particular one is probably from sometime in the late 70s or early 80s, as near as I could judge by the age of her system. And it's been outside. She has actually 3 of these because she has a 3-level house, and this is the lower one for the garden area, and then she has 2 decks above it. So there's 1 on each deck, or 1 in each location, and this one stopped working. The other ones I've repaired over the past 10 years or so, but this seemed to be the last one to go. So what we need to do is we need to open it up so we can take the speaker cone out of it. Now, the body of it, the case of it, it's either made out of some kind of really thick, heavy plastic, or it might be fiberglass. I'm not sure exactly, but it's really heavy and it's really dense, strong plastic. The first part of taking it apart is we have to take the swivel bracket off, because it's sort of a clamshell design, so it's 2 halves that open up like this. So we have to take the bracket off because the little ears that the bracket fits onto, they have these clips, and that helps hold it all together. So that's the first job, is to take this apart. So here's our first retaining nut. It's on the bracket on the left-hand side, and it's this big 6-sided self-threading sort of nut assembly, and it threads onto the 2 halves of the plastic post. Each half of the peg is 1 half of the case. Now, what you have to be careful of when you do this is, this is about 40 years old probably, and having been outside for all those years, the plastic tends to get brittle, and sometimes if you're not really careful, you can break off these plastic posts, and then there's nothing to hold the nut and the bracket on anymore, and then you've got kind of a problem. The way I like to do this, and you have to do this carefully, if you're real tough on this, you're going to break it, and then you're going to be sad. What I do first is I take a little WD-40 and I spray it on the nut. I think that helps some, or maybe I just think it does. I'm not sure, but that's just the way I normally do it. Then you need a pair of pliers. These are slip lock pliers, so you can leave them in this setting and the jaws close tight, or you can adjust it so the jaws are wider, so we want the wide setting. You can use a crescent wrench also if you want to, but I like the pliers. And then all you have to do is sort of grab the nut, and what I do is I turn it back and forth. It's kind of hard for you to see that. Like this. One of the tricks in taking out a screw or taking off a nut that's maybe stubborn and maybe kind of tough to take off is you twist it back and forth and back and forth. You just don't try to untwist it all at one time. Sometimes if you work it back and forth, you'll loosen it up, whatever it is about it that's making it difficult to take off, and it'll be easier to remove. What you don't want to do is go at it real strongly, because again, we don't want to break her case, because then it's a problem. So this one came off pretty well, and we'll put the parts in a cup so we don't lose them. And then there's this little springy sort of washer. It's a bent washer. It's to give some tension against the bracket so it doesn't come loose. And then there's a washer, so we'll put that in there. And then we'll turn it around, and then we'll do the other side. Now this side has 2 wires that come out of it, and these are the wires that go through the case and attach to the speaker cone. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll put a little WD-40 on it, and then we'll work it back and forth. And take it off. So there's our nut and our washer and our little flexi washer. And once you get those off, then you can sort of pull the bracket off like this. Once you have the bracket off, you can either set it aside, or what I'm going to do with this one, like, it's an aluminum bracket, and what happens to aluminum when it's outside, I think it's an anodized aluminum, it gets a lot of little pit marks in it. So what I'll do at the end is I'm going to wash it, and then I'm just going to sand it lightly with some fine sandpaper, like some 1500 grit or 1000 grit sandpaper, and then I'm going to give it a quick spray in sort of a flat black just to clean it up a little bit, because it'll make it look nicer when we put it back on her house. You know, one of the things about fixing equipment for people is it's one thing to fix it so it works, it's another thing to fix it up so it works and it looks better than it did when you took it off. People are always happier if you make it a little bit better. So right now we'll just set this aside. So once you have the bracket off, now we could take this apart. Oh wait, not yet, because we have to unscrew it. So the next thing we have to do is we have to take these cloth covers off, and they're held on each side with 4 screws, and these are just Phillips screws, and usually they come out pretty well, and they're not terribly, they're long because they thread way down into the case. I don't recommend that you, see that one's short, so the long one is one of the ones that helps hold the case together, and the short one is the one that just holds the cloth grill on. I don't recommend that you take these out with a cordless screwdriver, because sometimes they're very stuck in place, and if you wrench on it with the cordless screwdriver too much, you can snap the heads of the screws off, and then it's really hard to get the whole thing apart. So there's 4 of the screws, and we can lift this off. And now you can see here's our speaker cone inside. That's going to get replaced. These grill assemblies, it's sort of I think it's sort of a woven fiberglass cloth kind of material. And then on the inside, it has this perforated plastic sheet to give it some strength or body so it doesn't flop around too much over the opening. All we're going to do with this is we're going to wash them carefully and then let them dry. Once you've taken one side off, then we'll flip it over and take the other side off, and what we'll find is 2 of these screws will be long and 2 of them will be short, because the long screws hold the clamshell together, and so you have like alternating long screws. At least I think that's the way it is. Yeah. So there's a long one and another long one over here. So there's those screws, and here's the back cover. It's made the same way. We'll put that aside, and now we can see the back of our speaker cone, and all things being equal, we should be able to lift this apart. So here's our back half of the clamshell, and you can see how incredibly thick this is. This is probably altogether nearly a ½ an inch thick. So this is a really strong case, and it holds together really well. It's a very well-made product. These were very expensive when they were new. I don't remember the price in the late 70s or early 80s what something like this cost, but I think the retail price was probably somewhere around $125 or so. So even with a discount, it still would be a pricey item. Once you take the back cover off, you can see the speaker cone easily. There are 2 wires here. These are the wires that come out through the clamshell that get connected up to the wires from the wall-mounted remote control. And they have screws on the speaker, so we're going to loosen those because we're going to reuse the wires. They're good, sturdy wires, and they have these little spade connectors on the ends that fit under the speaker screw terminals easily, so these are going to get reused. And now we're going to take our speaker cone out, and it's held in place with 4 screws. Alright, so our screws are out. Now, you might be wondering, how do I know the speaker cone is bad? Well, when the customer called, she reported that this station had stopped playing, and when I went out there, I disconnected the wires behind the wall-mounted remote control and used my own meter to measure it, and I got an open reading. That tells me that I know the speaker cone is bad. So let me show you what that kind of looks like and how you test for that. Speaker cones are made up of several different parts. So you have on the front, you have the paper cone. And in this particular speaker, you have this little mini cone here in the center, which is attached to the dust cap underneath. The dust cap is the part that keeps the dust out of the coil. And then you have these round cardboard parts here. The paper speaker cone is glued onto the metal frame, and then these are glued around the perimeter of the speaker cone to help hold it all together. Because when a speaker cone operates, when the signal is coming out of it and it's making sound, it's flexing in and out like this. It's going in and out like this, so you don't want the edges to come loose. On the back of it, we have the metal frame of the speaker. Here we have the magnet, and inside the magnet, up in here, where it's really hard to see, and I'm going to show you in a minute in more detail, you have the end of the cone, and on the end of the cone, there's a small cylinder of paper or cardboard, and it's wrapped with a really fine hair-sized wire, and that's what's called the voice coil. The wires that come out of the voice coil are here, here, and here, and they're connected or soldered to the two terminals here and here, and then the wires go to that. So the signal with the sound comes from the wall remote control through the wires into the speaker, into here, and into the voice coil. And when the signal in the voice coil goes through the coil, it acts like an electromagnet, and it pushes against the magnetic force of the speaker magnet, and that's what makes it vibrate, and that's what makes the sound. So what's happened to this is the voice coil down inside here has failed. So that's why it has to be replaced. So how do you measure for that? How do you test it? You need a multimeter so you can measure it. Here's our example multimeter. This is an X-Tech EX330, and I've done a video about this. This is a good, well-made, reasonably priced multimeter that's great for the weekend warrior or occasional do-it-yourselfer. It's not a lot of money. You can buy it on Amazon. It's around $40-some, and it certainly will do a good job for you for the few times that you need this. What you need to do is put it on the ohms scale. The ohms scale is this one right here with the little omega symbol. So we'll put it on ohms, and we'll turn it on. And we'll set it up right here so you can see it. So right now, with the leads disconnected, they're not touching anything, the display on the multimeter shows OL. OL means over limit. Over limit means that you're not actually measuring anything. The probes are not touching anything. If I touch the probes together, the display will change, and it will show the resistance of the probe leads and the probe tips. And in this case, it's reading about somewhere, it depends on how sturdily you hold the tips together, it's reading about 0.3 ohms, 1/3 of 1 ohm. So that way you know that it's working. If we take our probes and we put them on the speaker terminals, one on this side and one on the other side, and no, it doesn't matter which way you put them. If you do this, it still shows, let me get the lead out of the way, it still shows over limit. And that means that the voice coil inside the magnet has a break in it and it's open. So we're not actually measuring anything because there's a break in the coil. And this is similar to what I saw when I was at the customer's house. I had a different meter. The readings on some meters are different than others, but fundamentally it's the same thing. We're not measuring anything because the coil in the speaker is bad. So let's go ahead and dissect our speaker cone really quick. This is trash, by the way. It has no usefulness anymore at all. You don't recone speakers like this. You just simply put in a new speaker cone. So since we're going to throw it away anyway, let's get our zebra knife here and let's take it apart, and I'll show you what I was talking about. So all we're going to do is we're going to cut around it. The paper is really thin and raggedy. It cut with almost no effort whatsoever. And we'll take our wire cutters and we'll go reach down in here and we'll cut the leads that come from the voice coil. And if we fold back the paper and look, you'll see down in here there's this sort of flexible corrugated diaphragm. This helps keep dirt and dust and things out of where the area where the voice coil fits inside the magnet. So to take this apart, we need to cut that apart also. It's a little hard to see. So let me go ahead and do that. Alright, so that's cut. Now all we're going to do is simply, well, that was easy. It just fell apart all on its own. So here's our frame without a cone in it. And what we have, let me get another screwdriver. What we have here, here's the back of the magnet, and this is the center of the magnet. And you might be able to see how it's magnetic, because it's a magnet. So if we take some of the screws that held the speaker to the box and we throw them on there, they all stick because that's the magnet right there in the center. If you look carefully, you'll see there's this gap right here between the frame and the magnet, this circular gap that's hard to make your screwdriver slide around because it's a fairly strong magnet. But there's a gap right there. So what goes in there? Well, here on the back of our paper cone, right here is our voice coil. And this voice coil, let me sort of take this off, it'd be easier to see. This coil right here with the fine enamel coated copper magnet wire, that fits inside, see if I can show you this, that fits inside that gap right like that. And this is the coil that the signal that carries your voice or the music or for the radio station you're listening to, this is the coil that energy goes through, and since it's placed around the perimeter of a magnet, it creates magnetic force and it causes the diaphragm to vibrate, and that's how a speaker operates. So this coil has failed. This coil. So this coil has failed. If you were to look at it very, very carefully, you would never find the break in it because the wires are too thin. And even though it looks perfect, and it's always actually, even to me, somewhat of a mystery about why that would fail out there, it did. So that's why we're going to replace it. So before we head on outside, you don't get to see that part, and wash everything and clean up the case and clean up the bracket and all like that, the thing we're going to do before that is we're going to treat our new replacement speaker cone. So this is a genuine NuTone 8-inch 25 ohm speaker cone, and it's the replacement speaker cone for my customer's ISA77. Now, NuTone doesn't officially make outdoor patio replacement speaker cones anymore. For whatever reason, they simply don't have them. And what makes an outdoor speaker cone different than an indoor speaker cone has entirely to do with the surface of the speaker cone itself. This is an indoor station, so it's just a formed plastic or paper cone, and it's meant for indoor use. If you're going to put it outside, you have to treat it or do something with it, because if you put a plain cone like this outside, it simply isn't going to last, and we want it to last a really long time. So what we're going to do is we're going to treat it and make it weatherproof and water resistant so it will last a long, long time. So to treat it, we use a product that's called the Wet Look. This is a product that's specifically designed to be used to weatherproof paper speaker cones for outdoor applications. And we've been using this for probably 10 years now. It's a good product, it's fairly inexpensive, and it does a really, really good job. It's a water-based product, so all you have to do is open it up. You need a little container like this, and we're going to pour a little bit in. And it doesn't actually take very much. That's probably plenty. And we'll close this up because we don't want to spill it. And then you need a paintbrush. And this is one of those disposable 39-cent paintbrushes you can buy at the home improvement store. And even though it's disposable, since this is a water-based product, when I'm done showing you how to do this, I'm going to take this out and clean it in the wash tray and let it dry and use it again. I've been using this for months and months and months here because we don't like to waste things. You take your brush, you put a little wet look on it. You don't need a lot to start. And the way I like to do this is I usually do around the inside edges first. And sort of the idea here is you want to treat and cover all of the surfaces. The more you cover and the more you treat, the longer it's going to last. So once you've done around the inside edge and the folds of the cone, then I like to go around and do the cardboard edges. Now this is somewhat, the wet look is somewhat thick. And when you use a brush, or really if you use anything to apply it, there's always brush marks and things, and that's just the way it is. But in reality, it doesn't really matter because nobody's ever going to see it once you install it. So you try to make it as nice as possible, but I wouldn't get too worked up over it. Once you've done the perimeter, then what I usually do is the little cone in the middle. So I'll do the sides of the cone, and then a little bit in the bottom. And again, you want to try to cover up all the paper, because when this dries, it's going to make the paper waterproof. It has UV light inhibitor in it, so the sun's rays and the UV light from the sun won't rot the paper, and it makes it last a really long time. Once you've done the inside of the small cone, you have to do the underneath of the small cone under here, so you sort of go around like this. And since this is a dark black product, it's easy to see when you've got it all coated. And once I've done that, then I go around like this on the center of the paper cone to make sure you get all of that coated. And once you've done that, that's probably would be considered the hardest part of the whole thing. Then you can go around the cone like this. And don't be too stingy with it. Don't, glop it on so it's running and puddling up and making a big mess out of it. But on the other hand, don't be too stingy with it either, because it's pennies worth of product to save you a lot of money for a failed speaker cone. And then once I have it all coated, I just sort of brush it around like this to make it look nice. That's been treated now. This will take about 15 or 20 minutes to dry. It'll be dry enough. It'll be dry to the touch, and you'll be able to reinstall it. If you want to, you can always wait an hour or more, and then you can go and give it a second coat if you want to. That's fine. I do that sometimes based on the application. I have some customers that have speakers that have no cover at all. They're just right out in the weather, and we treat those more heavily to try to make them last longer. So now I'm going to take my cup and my brush, and I'm going to go wash them out so I can use them again. I'm going to go and wash the customer's case and the bracket, and then I'll be back. I'm going to spare you watching me wash everything because that's not very exciting. So I'll be back in just a little bit. Okay, I'm back. So I've cleaned up the case and I've painted the bracket, and now it's time to reassemble things. Our new 8-inch patio speaker cone that we treated with the wet look is now dry. And what I wanted to show you before we started to put things back together is what happens when you measure a good speaker. So this is our new one, and it has the terminals here So what we're going to do is the same thing we did before. We're going to take our multimeter and put it on ohms and set it up so you can see it. And again, we're measuring nothing because the probes aren't touching anything. But now when we touch them to the terminals on the speaker cone, you should be able to see, if I do it this way, we now read 24.323 ohms, which you can see right here. It's a 25 ohm speaker cone. The 25 is nominal, so it could be like plus or minus 10%. 24 point something is fine. So this is a good speaker cone, and this is what you would see if you measure your speaker cone and it's still good. It doesn't take into account the rotted paper and the holes in it and the tears and all of that. It's just measuring the actual voice coil. So we know that our new speaker cone is good. Normally the next thing I would show you is how you take the original wire leads that had the little spade connectors on them, if it focuses, it's not going to, and you would reattach them under the screws on the speaker terminals, just like when we took them off the old speaker cone. However, in this particular case, because NuTone does weird things sometimes, this speaker cone doesn't actually have any screw terminals on it. And sometimes they're like that. So what I did was I took the original wires, because I do want to reuse them, and I cut the little connectors off the ends, and I'm going to put them through the holes in the terminals like this, and I'm going to solder them in place. Now, if you don't solder and you have this type of situation, you can go down to your local hardware store and buy little plastic covered crimped connectors that will slide onto the tabs. They're usually the blue colored ones because they have different sizes and they come in different colors, and you can crimp those on the ends of your wires and then slide them onto the terminal. I'm not going to do that because I don't like doing it that way. I prefer to solder it because once you solder it, it's a permanent connection. It's never going to corrode, it's never going to oxidize, and since I have everything here to do that, it's easy for me to do. And if you have a soldering iron, which I think most people do or should, it takes that long to do it. It's not really that big of a deal. These connections will never fail or falter now because it's as if it's all one piece. So our next step is to put the speaker cone back in the half of the clamshell, the same half that it came out of. And what we're going to do is just sit it in place and line it up with the screws. The wires go through the little slot on the end like this. And we'll worry about that more in a minute when we put it actually back together. And we'll take our 4 Phillips head screws that originally held the other speaker cone in place. And what I like to do is start each one, not tightening them down all the way yet. Usually I just tighten them up until the heads of the screws touch the frame of the speaker, and then you snug them down a little bit, sort of in a cross pattern. You don't need to wrench on these too much. One of the things that can happen, and I had this come up with another customer recently who ordered a speaker cone from us, is if you tighten them down unevenly and it twists the metal frame, which it can do, it can cause interference with the speaker cone vibrating when it makes sound, and then it doesn't sound right. So you don't want to have that. You want to have it's all just snugly in place. So this is done. We'll take our other half and we'll put it in place like this. And this is indexed. On the back you have a long post here and a long post here and a receptacle here and a receptacle here. So they're the same. When you put this together, the long post here goes in the receptacle there. And that's how it goes back together. It only really fits together one way, which would be like that. And then if you recall, There were long screws and short screws, but we don't put those back in until we're ready to put the cloth covers back on. When it comes time to put the covers back on, usually one cover is better than the other. The one that's been facing outward towards the yard is usually more discolored than the one that's been facing the back of the house. So in this case, this is the better of the two, and that's the one we're going to put on the front, and we'll put the more weathered one on the back. So all you have to do is place it back here. All I did with these was I took them over to the wash tray. I used some orange citrus cleaner, which is it's a good cleaner. It's rather mild because we don't want to wreck the cloth. And I just sprayed it and let it soak for a little while. And I used a nylon bristle brush and sort of scrubbed it a little bit, and then dried it, banged out the water and let it dry outside for a little bit. And since it's sort of a fiberglass material, it's pretty strong. I have seen people take these and paint them so they're black or some other color, and I don't really recommend that because you would fill up the openings in the fabric, and that's going to change the way it sounds. So it's better to leave it like this. I suppose if you really wanted to do something with them, maybe make them black or something. I don't know, because the box is sort of a bronzy kind of brown color, so I don't know if black is the right choice. These came in different colors over the years, so it's hard to know. You could take some fabric dye, like RIT dye or something like that, and you could mix it up, and I think you could paint it on here and it would sort of re-dye the fabric and it wouldn't fill up the holes, and that would be fine. All you have to do is put it back in place, take the long screws, and they go in the corners with the posts and the receptacles. And again, you don't want to do this with a cordless drill or a cordless screwdriver because you don't want to snap anything off. If you're doing it by hand, you sort of should have a better feel for how it's going in. And since you're re-threading it back into the original holes, it should go in pretty easily. And then the short screws go in the other two corners, and that's primarily just to hold the fabric cover so it doesn't flop around. The other thing I did, one of the two grills, I think it was this one, which would have been the front, it was kind of frayed on the edges, and I just used a pair of scissors and cleaned it up. So we'll flip it over, and we'll do the same thing on the front. Put it like that. You know, a lot of this is, when you go to put this back in, a lot of this will be important to make it look nice, but it's really kind of a first impression thing. When I go to put this back in, and she walks out there to hear it and to look at it, if it looks really nice and it looks like everyone made a proper effort, she's going to be happy with it. If you just take it back and it's all dirty and scuffed up and it looks like you don't really care, she's still going to accept it probably, but she's not going to be as happy. And if you're building a customer base or you're doing this at your own house and you have someone else in the house who's going to be looking at the work that you do, you want to do a good job so it's widely accepted, and that's good. There's our reassembled clamshell, and the cloth grills are back on. Now we just need to put the bracket back on. Okay, so here's the bracket. All I did was sand it lightly with some 220 grit sandpaper because that was fine. It wasn't pitted that much. It took the pitting off and it made it smooth, and I washed it. I gave it a quick coat of primer, and then I painted it. Actually, it's a hammered bronze color, and I thought the hammered bronze was better than the black because it matches the body of the speaker nicely, and I think that will be good. So all you have to do to put it back on is put the wires through one hole, sort of bend it around, put it over the ears where it fits. We'll put the washer on first, and then the springy washer and the nut, and yes, I painted the nuts also because, you know, put that on and thread that on. And we'll do the same on this side. On this side, of course, you have to put the wires through the holes, which is not really a big deal. Like that. And like that. And thread that on. And there you have it. So here we have our newly refurbished ISA77 8-inch outdoor surface mount patio speaker. It's been cleaned. It's had the speaker cone replaced. The speaker cone was treated with the wet look, so it should last a really long time, probably at least as long or maybe longer than the original one. We cleaned up the case, we painted the bracket so it all looks really nice, and it's ready to go back to the customer's house. If you have one of these and it doesn't work, it's a really easy fix. Altogether, start to finish, if I wasn't making the video, this would have taken me maybe an hour to do, and most of that time was time waiting for the paint to dry so I could handle the bracket. The rest of it was really very straightforward to do. So if you have one of these, they're easy to repair, they sound really good, and since they don't make a general replacement for this kind of speaker any longer, later on they made other types of surface mounted sort of patio bookshelf type speakers, but those haven't been available since the end of around 2008, and they're very hard to find. So if you have one like this, it's well worth repairing if you need the outdoor music because you already have it. I hope you found this video to be interesting and helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that always helps. If you like our videos and like our channel, please subscribe. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Click on the bell, put in your email, and you'll get notifications whenever we post a new video. That's all for today. See you on the next video.